The 47th G7 summit. The G7 leaders are expected to discuss climate change, the economy, the coronavirus pandemic and geopolitics, amongst other things. UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson is expected to use this summit as an opportunity to help the world fight the coronavirus and create a greener, more prosperous future. The summit will conclude this Sunday, the 13th of June. President Cyril Ramaphosa will also be part of the summit. John Bevir joins us live now. John, a very good day to you. Just give us a sense of anticipation as we await the beginning of the summit.
Well, yes, this is what everyone here has been waiting for. This, the first day of the G7 summit. On the agenda today, building back better after the pandemic, as well as some discussions to do with climate change as well. But really, it is that emphasis on how the world rebounds from the pandemic that many people are talking about here today. The news yesterday that Joe Biden has promised 500 million doses of vaccine. The UK has added 100 million to that figure. Very much the aim is that the G7 countries will be donating 1 billion doses sometime over the next 12 to 18 months. Now, of course, already criticisms from some leading charities saying that's simply not enough. They need to do more and they need to do it sooner. But the G7 leaders very much trying to focus on the good news and how they are going to help the world recover.
There's usually an NGO protest or presence at such events, but of course, due to COVID-19, things are done differently now. Are you able to, is there any presence at this particular summit?
Well, there is a huge police presence here because they are very concerned about protesters. There are plenty of protest groups within the UK. So even though we're not seeing the huge amount of protesters maybe that we've seen at previous G7 summits because they're not able to get here from abroad, that's not the case locally. So, for example, yesterday there were 7 people arrested not far from where the summit is taking place. Now, there's no suggestion they were trying to do anything too sinister, but in their car they found smoke bombs and cans of paint and things like that. So it seems they were more trying to cause a nuisance rather than trying to cause harm. Certainly lots of peaceful protests going on here as well. There are various protests planned. You see things as you walk through the town here. There are signs up with people calling on lots of different issues that people care about. A lot of people in this part of the UK care deeply about climate change because, you know, we are here right on the coast, so they are very worried about sea levels and things like that. We will definitely see some protests, but the police here very much hoping that it is nothing more than people's right to express their disagreement and their strong feelings.
John, outside of the G7 members, what prominence will be given to the invited heads of states, including South Africa and India?
Well, it's very interesting, isn't it, in terms of the dynamic here. So you have the G7 nations and then you have these invited nations as well. Now, a lot of people here saying that South Africa have been invited because they really are the key ally in Africa itself. Now, a lot of people saying actually South Africa should have played a much bigger part. They should have been here from the start rather than just being involved officially from tomorrow. So we're seeing a lot of that, of people saying that actually there's there needs to be more inclusion of Africa and of India and of places like that. The Indian delegation are attending remotely because of the coronavirus problems they have there. So I think we're going to find that in terms of the world leaders, everyone's going to be trying to put as positive a spin as possible on this, but there are plenty of people arguing that actually much more needs to be done to help the developing world and to help nations who aren't part of the G7. So I think we're going to have to wait and see in terms of whether all this fancy rhetoric actually turns into actions and how quickly it does as well.
Of course, ahead of the summit, there was conversation about how isolated this venue is and difficult to access. Just give us a sense in terms of the logistics of getting the leaders there, and have they all arrived?
So all of the G7 leaders are here now, and the other nations are arriving as we speak. In terms of where we are, we're right down in the southwest of Cornwall, so we're about 5 or 6 hours from London. It is an unusual choice to become the centre of the diplomatic universe for the next few days. As you can see behind me, it's lots of small fishing villages. This part of the world relies heavily on tourism as well. The UK was hoping that the G7 would shine a spotlight on this part of the UK. It's made it difficult for leaders to get here. They've had to fly into the nearby airport, and then we're seeing these huge convoys come rolling past along these relatively small country roads. The big problem at the moment, though, is the UK tourist industry was very much hoping to highlight this area, but at the moment it's raining, and we are just hoping that that's going to stop at some stage in the next couple of days.
John, ahead of this summit was that finance ministers meeting in the UK over the weekend, where the big conversation was that global tax reforms. How is this being incorporated into the conversation by the leaders?
Yeah, so they are very keen to stress that that is already something that everyone has agreed to, and that we are going to see big changes to the tax system that is going to impose fairer taxes on these, especially on these tech giants, as they're known. So the leaders very keen to kind of sell that as something that's already been achieved. But of course, when it comes to any complex financial situations like that, then we're going to see months of paperwork, aren't we, in order to make sure that everyone is signing up and agreeing to it. Expect more conversations about that at the G20 as well, which is in Rome this year, which of course South Africa is a part of. So the G7 very much are selling this as an idea, and then the rest of the world is going to get on board with it. But certainly it's an idea that's very popular because, you know, let's face it, if you are a company making billions of dollars in profit, then you would hope that you are going to be paying at the very least hundreds of millions of dollars of tax, which at the moment for some of these companies isn't the case. So the leader's keen to sell that as something that's already been chalked off. As you say, finance ministers discussed that last week. So yes, that's something that they are keen to put down as a victory already.
We're talking to you as we're watching footage of the President of the EU Commission arriving as well. Just give us a sense of what other global leaders are taking part in these conversations.
Yeah, so it's very much the G7 trying to be seen as more inclusive, as I was talking about, and including other leaders, whether that's the EU, whether that's South Africa or India or people like that. There are criticisms, though, of course, as I mentioned before, that there's not enough inclusivity of other countries. Now, the G7 would argue that's what the G20 is for, but then critics would say, well, it's all very well for these 7 rich nations to come up with ideas and try and impose them on the rest of the world. It's whether the rest of the world likes it. So the G7, of course, trying to sell everything as being beneficial for other people. So when we talk about vaccines, for example, that's something that is not going to need a hard sell from the the rest of the world. It's the G7 leaders trying to look charitable almost, but of course already complaints that they're not doing enough, and they're not doing enough soon enough. In terms of the EU, things are still very tense between the UK and the EU in regards to Brexit, and there are still lots of arguments about Brexit deals and problems with the border between Northern Ireland and Ireland itself. The Americans very strongly have said they won't support any measures that jeopardise the Good Friday Agreement. That was the peace process. Joe Biden himself, a proud Irish American, so he has already discussed that with UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson yesterday. So expect more difficult conversations between the UK and the EU, with maybe the United States and these other nations acting as a mediator, because it's in everyone's best interests, they would argue, that there are free and fair trade deals to help boost economies around the world.
John, do we know what South African President Cyril Ramaphosa's agenda is at this meeting, and what specific conversations he will be having?
Well, officially, these invited nations are part of the conversation from tomorrow. In terms of what they're going to be focusing on, well, of course, vaccines is going to be a huge part, you would imagine, of the president's trip here. This announcement that there should hopefully be somewhere in the region of 1 billion vaccines going out to almost 100 of the poorest countries in the world. So you expect the president to be heavily involved in those conversations. As well, climate change. The final day of the summit on Sunday, the very famous and noted broadcaster Sir David Attenborough is addressing the summit, talking about the impact of climate change. So that is obviously something that hugely affects Africa and a lot of developing nations as well. So we expect the president to have plenty of influence there as well. And he's very much being seen as the contact between the G7 and the rest of Africa. He's being held up as the figurehead, really, who is here representing not only his country but his continent as well.
Just in terms of civic society, is this aspect of society included? Is there a component of this in the agenda?
Yeah, certainly, you know, the agenda will not rule anything out. There are lots of bilateral conversations going on as well. So whereas the kind of official agenda is very much focusing on building back from the pandemic and climate change and business ties, of course, there are meetings going on behind the scenes to discuss all sorts of issues. This, of course, the first time leaders have met since the pandemic started. So it really is an opportunity for a lot of people to discuss all aspects of life that they think need addressing from a global scale. It is difficult though, because in terms of what is discussed and then what is put forward publicly, the G7 do a lot to keep the media out. They want all of these conversations to very much be in private, and then you have the public-facing press conferences afterwards. So it's a case of reading between the lines and speaking to people in the delegations just to get a steer on what direction the conversations are going. But expect everything to be on the table in terms of discussion. This is a very good opportunity for people to come to spend some time face to face and to really rebuild some relationships after a year or 18 months where many world leaders haven't had any in-person contact with their other world leader colleagues from across the globe.
Of course, we'll be watching developments as they unfold. But John Bevir, thank you so much for setting the scene for us as the G7 meeting of the most powerful nations gets ahead.